Welcome everybody to this tutorial where we'll be looking at coding some ExtendScript in VS Code to take control of your Adobe applications. Welcome everybody to the Automator Plus. I'm your host, not your host, I'm Lawrence, and I'll be showing you how to install the official ExtendScript Debugger from Adobe in VS Code, how to use VS Code as your IDE, telling you what an IDE is, how to use the Premiere Pro API, digging a bit into some of the cool features of the Adobe API, and in general, teaching you a few tricks that you can use to start your journey on automating your pipeline within Premiere Pro. Cool. If you've never coded in your life, don't worry. If acronyms like IDE and API are making you squirm, stick around and we'll unpack everything. Let's start with an IDE. An IDE is an integrated development environment. Basically the text editor, or let me rather say the text editor. It's more than just a text editor when you are coding. Perhaps when you're working on some admin tasks, Word, or perhaps Google Docs is enough, but when you're coding, you want extra powers, you want superpowers, and you want to be able to drill into your code much easier and link things up, have some automated templates, because when it comes to coding, your time is precious and you want to be able to automate as much as you can. If you don't have VS Code, you can head over to VS Code, just give it a Google. Head over there, depending on if you're on Windows or on Mac, just hit the download button, hit next for Windows, or just drag it over to the applications folder on Mac. Right, so here we are in VS Code, and just to take you on a quick tutorial, these files, basically this first little icon, your icons are here on the left, and your files, once we open a folder, you'll see the superpowers. There's just so much more than just browsing your files. Searching things, but not just searching your file, you're searching your entire directory. You can replace things in multiple places at one time. But here's really where the magic happens. The extensions tab here in VS Code. And the first extension that I urge you to install is the ExtendScript extension. And basically what this is going to install, it's going to install all the required packages that are needed to interact with the host application. So we'll chat a bit about the host application. But for the API, you can think of all your Adobe applications, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Illustrator. We're going to term these the host application, with our client being VS Code. And we're going to be sending our commands over to the host from the client and running commands like that. All right, so I'm just installing here the ExtendScript Debugger. Right, so this is the ExtendScript Debugger, and once you've installed that, it'll enable you to debug your host applications, being Premiere Pro, Illustrator, After Effects, right from VS Code. And this is where our superpowers are going to come from. So previously, you had to use the ExtendScript UI toolkit, which had a user interface that was nothing to write home about. Let's say that. So VS Code, as I mentioned, great IDE. It's got all these superpowers that really mainstream developers of languages like Java, like C++, like Python use. But you've got all those abilities right at your disposal to leverage all of the extensions and all of the amazing superpowers that VS Code comes with to write your ExtendScript code. I'm explaining that to you by the hand of an example. I'm here in VS Code. I'm going to open a new file. I'm just going to set this language that we are coding in to JavaScript. So ExtendScript is Adobe's extension to JavaScript, aptly named ExtendScript. But basically it's the same syntax highlighting, it's the same syntax as JavaScript, but just a bit of an older version. And we'll get back into that at some later tutorials about exactly what differences there are between JavaScript and ExtendScript. But usually you are quite well away just coding some normal JavaScript and it'll execute on the ExtendScript sky. Right, so we're looking at what is an API. And I want to explain this by hand of an example. And imagine you could control your dog. Imagine you could tell your dog to bark and set the loudness that your dog should bark. Imagine you had an interface into that. So an API is short for Application Programming Interface. And it's basically a list of commands that allow you to toggle and interact with something else. I'm gonna go ahead and write some pseudocode, which is basically a scamp of code. So this is code that's not gonna execute. It's not real code. It's basically me just verbalizing concepts and trying to illustrate to you how code could look. But this is not valid code. This is just explaining to you how an API could look. So we're gonna go ahead here and create a new dog. So we're gonna say, hey, our dog's name is Jake, and we're creating a new dog. And usually you'll see syntax like this. Again, don't worry if this is not making sense to you. For now, we are just writing some pseudocode, not actual code that will execute. Right, so we got our dog here. We're naming it Jake, and it is a German Shepherd.
Me fail English? That's impossible.
So here we've gone and we've defined our Jake dog. Now imagine you could say something like, go ahead and bark Jake, or go ahead and sit Jake, or go ahead and choose some shoes. And even further, instead of just saying bark, imagine you could control what type of bark he's going. So imagine you could say, I would like this dog to bark at a loudness of, 0.8%, something like that. This is an example of an API. It's a way for us to get hold of an object, get hold of something on the other side. For us, it's going to be Premiere Pro. It's going to be getting our hands on the clips, on the tracks of the sequence. But this is another example of just how you could write an API to control your dog. Not going to control your dog. This is just an example. Right, so let's take a look at the Premiere Pro API. And basically an API, just a list of commands that we are allowed to execute, telling us how we should execute these commands. So for our Premiere Pro API, we've got things in here like app object, project object, sequence object, track object. So instead of our dog example, we've got more relevant things to Adobe. Within the API, within the Premiere Pro API, they've gone with the decision to abstract the objects that you can get a hold of in various ways. So in here we've got the project item, we've got the sequence object, the track object, and each of these have their own attributes and methods. Attributes are much like attributes in humans, the colors of your eyes, the color of your hair. Things that are usually fixed can be changed. You can go and color your hair, but it's usually things that don't need any action. It's just fixed facts, can change over time, but fixed. Methods, on the other hand, are functions. These are doers. These are actions that you want to execute on your object. So for example, if we look at this sequence object, attributes are generally things like name, ID, how many audio tracks are there, how many video tracks are there, whereas methods would be actions, saying, hey, let's clone this, let's get the player position. So usually you'd find a verb in methods, as well as these brackets. So zooming into this track object, and this little example that we're going to look at how to code up in VS Code, we're going to go ahead and mute one of our tracks within Premiere Pro. And this might seem like a very small example, but the power of coding sort of comes with the abstracted concept that you know how to tweak these variables, and when you start putting them together and you start really putting together a script, a lot of code, a lot of functionality, and you start building basic building blocks. Once you got that, you can build much bigger automations. Right, so digging into this track object, we can see that it's got attributes and methods, and we're just going to zoom in on this setMute method. So the setMute method is a method for us to mute a track. Once we've got a handle on that track, we'll go into some code on how we can do that. And usually in API, you'll find some description of what a function does, what parameters it expects, and what you can expect in return. Here we see a little breadcrumb of the open source community. So this setMute method definition here has got no attribute in there. However, over here it is stated. So be aware, any documentation that you find anywhere, especially for open source projects, are not always spot on, and you need to sometimes figure some things out. Not all the methods and the attributes are always documented either. So be aware that at the end of the day, you're going to start to have to figure things out, and documentation, and we're here to guide you on your journey, but at the end of the day, you need to get your hands dirty and figure it out. Right, let's get our hands dirty with the Premiere Pro API. What I'm going to need you to do is just to head over to your desktop and create a folder. Let's go ahead and call this tutorial 1. Right, so we're going to go into File, Open, and we're just going to go and select that folder we just created. This does a few things in the background, but ultimately gives you superpowers. So we're going to go and create a new file. So I'm just going to go new file. And this is going to be our first ExtendScript file. And things might look a bit foreign to you at first, but let's see how this goes. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is create a file. Just going to go here to new file, and we're going to save this as mutetrack1.jsx. So that JSX extension is telling VS Code that this file is an ExtendScript file. So you can see the little JavaScript roots there, JSX. Right, so we're in our mutetrack1.jsx file, and I'm just bring on some code that you can find in the link in the GitHub repo below. Basically what this code is doing, we're gonna go and get a handle on all our tracks. So I've got Premiere Pro open here. I've got 5 video tracks. So this first line of code is gonna go and get a list of all of those 5 video tracks. Then we're gonna go and select the first track by using these square braces. And then once we've got a hold on that first track, we're gonna go ahead and set the mute state to true. Don't worry if this is confusing you, stick around. We want to now go ahead and execute this code. For us to execute it, we're going to have to go over to this run extension, this run tab in VS Code. And as soon as you get here, if this is your first time opening VS Code in this folder, there won't be a launch.json file. And a launch.json file is a special file for VS Code and within a workspace area. To tell it exactly what it should run, right? So we're going to start debugging our scripts now, and we need to tell VS Code that we are speaking JavaScript, that we are speaking C, that we are speaking Python. What language are we speaking, so that it can debug it, as well as route it to where the code needs to go. So this is the little piece between VS Code and the Adobe application. All right, so we're just going to go ahead here and create a launch file quite easily. And directly you'll see you get the options of, do you want to create a Chrome launch file, ExtendScript debug, Java, Node.js, and more. We are definitely going to go and an ExtendScript debug file, launch.json file. And you see it comes nice and pre-populated with some code. If you did not install the ExtendScript debugger yet, you will not have the ability to add the ExtendScript debugger template. Cool, so let's unpack a bit what's going on here. So if you've ever heard of a JSON file, it's short for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's usually in these little curly braces. So you see I've got a JSON extension actually in my VS Code. So it is something that comes up quite a lot. And here I'm just unpacking it a bit. Basically giving us some details about our launch, our run that we're going to execute. So it tells us what type we're going to debug. It's going to be ExtendScript. We're going to tell it exactly what do we want it to do. We want it to launch. We give it a name, and you'll see that this name correlates to here in our run tab. We've got various, we've currently just got one, so we've only got the ask for script configuration in there. But you can see with this add configuration, we can add additional configurations. So you never have to type these out. You can always just hit the button down here. Okay, coming back to this little example here, our name is ask for script. Program is telling us exactly the location of the script we want to execute. And here it is quite beneficial to open your files all in the same workspace. So when we open VS Code and we open that folder, we opened VS Code as a workspace. And that's basically going to make this workspace folder variable inherit the location wherever that folder is on your PC. So that makes it possible for you to just use relative paths to your files instead of the full absolute path. And what this configuration is going to do is actually going to ask for a script name, as it implies. So if we execute this little input's going to come up, and it's going to ask us for a script name. All right, so our script name, we call it mute track1.jsx. And we get an error. And this error is telling us that, hey, we can't start a session without an active target engine. So we haven't connected VS Code to Adobe yet. And you'll see this little yellow icon appearing at the bottom saying select the target application. I'm going to go on, click there, and then we're going to go and select Premiere Pro. So I've got 4 Adobe applications installed on my Mac here. It's the Media Coder 2019, 2020, as well as Premiere Pro 2019, 2020. But the Premiere Pro that I've got open, and you can only connect to a host, to a target application, if it is open. So I've got the 2019 Premiere Pro open here on my side. So I'm just go ahead and select application Premiere Pro 2019. Right, so we've hooked up our Adobe application, and now we are ready to hit our run button again. So this is the code that we're going to execute, and I'm just going to drag my VS Code to the right here so that we can see what is happening on the Adobe side. Cool. If I hit run here, and it asks for our file name, so that is just again mute track1.jsx. We can see that it does indeed mute this first video track within Premiere Pro. Right, so typing this mute track 1 every time is a bit tedious, so we can efficientize our workflow by just saying to this launch.json file, we actually want to execute this mute track1.jsx every time, and let's give this a better name, mute track 1. Alright, so you can see there, updates in our configuration file. We've got mute track 1 over here. I'm just going to drag this to the bottom, and let's execute this against our Premiere Pro. Boom, as soon as I execute that, we can see that our first track actually does get muted. If I were to go back in here and set it to false, we can see that the first video track is set to false. Right, let's dive into this code a bit further again and chat about these commands. I've got the Premiere Pro documentation open here behind my VS Code, and I just want to explain to you the sort of tree, descending through the tree that we do to get to this video tracks, and how the documentation that you find on this pro-enhancers.com relates to the code that we're writing here. Right, so this app object is relating to this application object. And on the documentation here, you can see that this is the single global object that is always available to you, the app object. So anywhere in your ExtendScript, you can always write app dot, and you've got access to your Adobe application. Then we're going to descend into the current project, right? So if we look here on our documentation, attributes, we see that we've got a project item. So our project, that's the currently active project. So we want to get to those video tracks within our project. So naturally we want to go into the active project. Furthermore, we actually want to go down another step and actually go into the active sequence within that project. But now just again to tie those strings together, if we want to go into a project, we'll be into this project item, and then we can go into our active sequence. Now, active sequence, that's the currently active sequence, right? Then we get a sequence object, so we're going down that entire tree, we get our sequence object, and sequences has got a few attributes as well, and we see video tracks, boom, an array of video tracks. So array, basically just a list. So if we journey down our API tree via app, project, active sequence, we can get a whole of those video tracks. We then store them in a variable called video tracks. We create a new variable called first track and assign the 0th element in the video tracks list. So that's going to be our first track. And then we set the mute state of that. Right guys, so today we looked at how to use VS Code as an IDE to write some ExtendScript and chat to your Adobe applications. So we looked at a very simple example of just muting the first video track, but the power of knowing the Adobe API, the journey has just begun. Once you know a bit more of the functionality, a bit more of the API, you come to know a bit more JavaScript and your skills improve, then you really are able to start putting together some core functionalities to make automations that save you hours.